it so we can be live on YouTube as well. And then we'll begin our class. Or are we live on Facebook? And anyone who's on Facebook, just let me know if we are live. Just a moment.
Until that data is published.
Let's just check. If anyone's on Facebook page, I'm trying to check if we're live. It looks like we are. Okay, let's just share onto YouTube, share into wherever else we need to go. And we'll be ready to begin. We're actually going to continue where we left off yesterday because we had a very fascinating discussion. And I just need to tell you about tomorrow. Please God, going forward on Wednesdays, we're going to do Pirkei Avot, Ethics of Our Fathers. Well, I'm going to give it a different name. We're going to call it, I forgot, I had a name for it, something about character. All right, anyways, join us here tomorrow. Wednesdays, we're starting a new series called Cultivating Character, which will be Are we back, guys? It looks like I got kicked out again. For those of you who are not in South Africa watching, I don't know about whatever country you're in, but in South Africa, we have serious issues sometimes with our internet. So depending where I'm broadcasting from, we could have problems sometimes. So today's one of those days where I'm having some issues. But anytime I get somehow logged out, just bear with me, unless there is a blackout, unless we're having what we call here load shedding, I'll be right back. So you just have to bear with me. All right, what I'm gonna do today is just quickly recap what we discussed yesterday. We started with a question about Egypt. And in fact, it was a question that was addressed by Rabbi Yosef Cairo, not Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Avadia Yosef, who was Israel's chief rabbi for a number of years, the Sephardic chief rabbi. And he discussed this matter when all of a sudden, after between, 70 something, when Israel and Egypt began their negotiations for a peace treaty, and people were all of a sudden having the opportunity to travel to Egypt, the question, of course, was, can a Jew go to Egypt? Now, the question, now you're wondering, why can't a Jew go to Egypt? What's wrong with going to Egypt? We Jews, after all, are global. We're an international phenomenon. We're everywhere. And the basics of it is, let's just see if we could get our slides moving. Yes, there we go. Can everyone see? Okay. The basic problem about living in Egypt for us Jews might be the fact that the Torah portion we read just last week says, you shall not go. Here you can see the actual verse. And, it doesn't have the highlight that I put in yesterday. Oh, well, it means it didn't save the file as I intended it to be, part of the fun of technology. But if you look on the right-hand side here, the verse clearly says that you shall not, whereas you have seen the Egyptians today, you shall see them again no more forever. So what does that verse seem to indicate is that we will never see the Egyptians. This is actually a discussion. And there's various commentators that discuss this. What does this verse actually mean? Some say it means that there's actually a prohibition and a curse associated with living in Egypt, which we discussed yesterday, that there were times that Jews actually tried to return to Egypt. And the verse here says that you shall see Egypt no more. So because it's a prohibition that we can't live in Egypt, we would never succeed there. And we mentioned 3 times that Jews tried to return to Egypt, and it ended in cataclysmic failure. It really did not end well. The first was in the era of the destruction of the first temple. And that was a situation where Sancherib, and after Nebuchadnezzar was capturing Jerusalem and destroying the temple, that people were moving to Egypt, but it didn't end very well. And Hoshea, who's the king of Israel at the time, seeks a military alliance with Egypt, but it ended in defeat. The second failure was a couple of years later during the Babylonian exile, when Jews settled there, and they were led by Yochanan ben Koreach, But again, they all died. It didn't end very well. And the third time was during the Second Temple period, when Jews were flourishing in Egypt. In fact, we described yesterday about the temple, the shul that they had in Egypt, how magnificent, how grand it was, and yet still Trajan killed them all. It wasn't a very good situation. It did not end very well, let's put it that way. And of course, that being the case, one wonders if there's this kind of ban on Jews returning to Egypt, as we see in these various historic attempts that people tried to return and it ended in tragic failure. What's the reason? Why can't we go back to Egypt? In fact, I was thinking to maybe call today's shir, can I drive a Mercedes-Benz? Because this question really is not only relevant to Egypt. Yes, we experienced slavery and persecution and difficulty in Egypt during our 210, how many years of slavery there? But what about other countries where we actually suffered and struggled and had difficult times as well? And this is a question that was asked against the backdrop of many other great sages. Why are we prohibited from going to Egypt? For example, let's put Maimonides up here. He says it's permitted to dwell anywhere in the world with the exception of the land of Egypt. Yet he himself lived there for 41 years. And we analyzed a few commentaries who discuss how it's possible that Rambam could have lived there if indeed he himself tells us that it was that one's not allowed to. And I showed you yesterday the video of Rambam's life, and you saw that he lived there for many years. Some say it was only a temporary measure, that you could say two ways. Either that it was only temporary that he lived in Egypt, or you could say that the prohibition was only temporary because Egypt was a morally depraved country. And the essence of it was that God didn't want us to be influenced to learn from the Egyptian immorality. But since Sancherib mixed up the whole world, and everybody was scattered everywhere, were dispersed in all the corners of the world. And so the Egyptians are no longer truly the Egyptians. And you could, they were not the same Egyptians. And many Jews were dispersed out of Israel as well. So you might say that, well, we're mixed everywhere. And we're all over the world. We're global today. So it's not necessarily as relevant today too. And this is one of the explanations. In fact, it doesn't say anywhere in Shulchan Aruch that you can't live in Egypt. So again, that being the case, if it's limited to when Egypt was inhabited by the original Egyptians who had enslaved us, who caused us, who inflicted the troubles upon us, or you could say that it was the temporary measure, whichever way it is, we have to understand what is this verse about? Why? Because if you look at Rambam, he really makes it quite clear that, there's some problem with Egypt. So today we're going to continue that discussion and try to understand what's the problem with Egypt. What does Egypt represent? Because I could tell you people, whether it's for business matters or other reasons, but there are people who certainly still go to Egypt today. And you could say if that's the case, Rambam went there. Perhaps he got stuck there. It was just a business matter, but he returned to the land of Israel. But here's another very important point that we concluded yesterday's discussion with. And this is not just relevant to Egyptians. I think this is relevant to anyone who's done you an act of kindness. The fact is, the Torah says, you should not despise the Egyptian because you were a stranger in their land, right? When we needed food, it's the Egyptians that looked after us and took care of us during the difficult famine in the land of Israel, when Yaakov and his family had to go down there and they were provided with all their food provisions for that time. Yet still, with that clause that the Torah says not to despise the Egyptian, Rambam makes it clear that there's a problem with Egypt. And what's interesting is that some took a cue from the Egyptian ban and actually prohibit Jews from settling anywhere in places where the streets of those cities, towns, countries ran red with the blood of Jews. And this, I mentioned Rabbi Avadia Yosef earlier, the Sephardic chief rabbi of Israel. What's interesting is in 1978, I was reading his responsa, where he was invited to make an official visit to the Jewish community of Madrid in Spain. And he writes about it. He talks about this. Obviously, Spain experienced the infamous Inquisition. I told you the story yesterday about Purim Saragossa, which was this week. The Jewish community of Spain, on a number of occasions, were expelled, and that the last expulsion lasted nearly 500 years, from 1492, and Jews only returned to Egypt in the 20th century. To Spain in the 20th century. So it's interesting reading what Rabbi Avadia Yosef talks about when he writes about about Spain. And it's interesting here what he says. Let me just find his words. He says that he has a colleague, Rabbi Yaakov Moshe Toledano. The Toledano family is a very famous rabbinic family. In fact, he was the chief rabbi of Tel Aviv, Rabbi Yaakov Moshe Toledano, and he wrote a sefer called Ner Hamarav, something like that. And he says, he writes in this book that it's a family tradition where their name came from. Where did the name Toledano? You may have heard of Jews named Toledano. You ever wondered where the name Toledano comes from? So he says the origins of the name Toledano are from the words Toledo no. I guess in Spanish, maybe in English it makes sense as well. They came from Toledo in Spain, and after experiencing the Inquisition, after experiencing the harsh expulsion of Jews from that land, they made a decision. They will never, ever return to Toledo, to Spain. And that's where the family name comes from. Toledo, no. That's just an interesting legend, so to say. And he writes it in his book, Rabbi Yaakov Moshe Toledano. And Rabbi Avadia Yosef says, though, that he believes that's incorrect. In fact, he says there were many other great rabbinic families, such as the Beit Yosef. The Beit Yosef is Rabbi Yosef Karo, who authored the Shulchan Aruch. He was born in Spain. He left with the mass exodus of the expulsion. He was exiled from Spain. And he does not write in the Shulchan Aruch, in the code of Jewish law that he authored. He doesn't write anywhere that Jews should not return to Spain. And likewise, you think Spain, what about Germany? Germany is a country that inflicted throughout history, the most harsh and difficult era that we ever experienced. I think even worse than the time of the temple's destruction. I don't think there was any time in Jewish history where 6 million of our people were slaughtered as we experienced in the Holocaust. And yet, it's not said anywhere that Jews cannot go back to Germany. And Rabbi Avadia Yosef writes about this. He actually discusses a rabbinic conference that was discussing this matter, talking about how Germany inflicted the termination, the death, butchering a third of the Jewish people. And he says, though, that there was no prohibition based on anything that he's seen of Jews returning to Germany. And I can tell you personally, I was in Germany 9 years ago for Hanukkah. Was it 9 or 10? Well, it will be 10 years this year. Hanukkah 2011. And I'm trying to see if any of the people present on this group here today were there. But we went for let's just see who may have been there. Anyone on this group? Whoever was in the JJMC, the Johannesburg Jewish Male Choir, in 2011, we went to Germany. And boy, was that an experience singing in Berlin. We were in Frankfurt, we were in Berlin. We sang at various shuls there. It was some experience being in Germany then. I have to say, it was quite an incredible experience being there then. And perhaps another time I could tell you more about that experience. One of the highlights to me of that experience was Hanukkah at Brandenburg Gate. That was something, because there we were at the very place where we were there in 2011, how many years before were the Jews in Germany being at Brandenburg Gate being murdered, at Brandenburg Gate burning all our books, and there we were lighting the menorah at that very place. So that was quite an experience as well. But the point I'm trying to make, though, is that there was no prohibition against Jews returning to Germany. And in fact, today you have a very prosperous Jewish community in Germany. And I don't think they would be there. I don't think the Rebbe would send his shluchim there. I don't think that there would be so many rabbinic personalities. In fact, I think Germany today is a huge, larger than the South African Jewish community. It's 120,000 Jews, maybe more. You could Google it. So why are so many Jews back in Germany? And of course, this takes us back to our original question. If the rabbinic authorities discussing this concept of bans on various countries that inflicted so much pain to us, such as Spain with the Spanish Inquisition, where they expelled Jews from the entire Iberian Peninsula, including Portugal and whatever other countries were under Spanish rule. And Germany that did what it did. Okay, granted, many people don't want to go back to those places. When I look at my parents' history, my mother's family came from Poland, from a city called Belz. You've heard of Belz? Belz, Belz, mein Stadt, alle Belz. You know, the country was once saturated with Jewish life. Today, Poland doesn't have such a thriving Jewish community any longer. My mother's family would never go back there. And my father came from Russia, also not easy. And when I went to Russia, my father had a hard time with me going back to his homeland. And when he left Russia, he went through Germany and described to me the anti-Semitism. This is even after the war. It wasn't pleasant there. So Egypt, though, seems to be the only country that the Torah certainly seems to indicate don't go back there. And besides for the Torah's indication not to go back to Egypt, it's a debate amongst the sages whether this was a permanent or a temporary injunction. So why? And then maybe you can make a decision about if you want to drive your Mercedes-Benz. So one answer that comes to mind, and this is something that it's a curious fact of history, that the Jews, so small in our overall numbers, that you look at us, we're everywhere in the world. In just about any place on earth, you'll find a Jew there. And I had some time in my teenage years where I've traveled, whether I was in India, and boy, will you find Jews anywhere you go. I don't have to start enumerating the places. Before Pesach this past year, I was fielding calls from Jews throughout Africa, asking for Pesach provisions, asking us to send them matzah and wine and different things. And actually, we had a hard time sending it because it was lockdown here. And some of these places, you couldn't actually ship things during lockdown. It just wasn't allowed. But the irony to me, that Jews are in these far-flung places. And of course, searching for a way to connect. And here in Africa, there's not necessarily organized Jewish communities in every little country, yet there's a way to connect. They call the Chabad house, and I was dealing with that then. But the Kabbalah explains that there's a reason, there's a purpose for this. And the reason explained in Kabbalah is that the time our universe was created, there were sparks of divinity that were scattered across the globe. And there they lie, hidden, little nuggets of godliness, sparks that are just waiting to be rediscovered, to be activated, so that they light up the world once again, those sparks, those netzutzot. And so it's the job of each one of us to find these sparks. And so you find Jews wandering all corners of the globe. Wherever we are on earth, we're collecting the threads of God that you could say lie abandoned, so that we could weave them into this tapestry of universal perfection. That's our mission, and that's stated in the broadest of terms. So practically speaking, it's about, you make a bracha before you drink your cup of tea. You say a blessing before you're eating your lunch, wherever you are, whether you're in Joburg or in Kathmandu, whether you're in Bogota or Nairobi airport. You give some tzedakah. You put a smile on someone's face. You make a difference wherever you might be, because there are sparks of godliness that are waiting for you, for each one of us. And there are countless such stories, and that's why Jews have been dispersed throughout the 7 continents. That's our destiny. We have to bring the light of God into the most remote and darkest corners of earth. It is who we are and is what we do. And this is something that the Talmud tells us. That's why God dispersed us around the world. God dispersed us because there are sparks of life that need to be refined, that need to sparkle. And yes, we can make that difference when we do something in each of those places, wherever we might be. It's our mandate. It's our mission. We're meant to be doing this. Some stories that come to mind. One is an old story of somebody who came to the Rebbe Marash. He was a heartbroken chassid. This guy was a pious Hasidic Jew. And he lived for many long, happy years in the city of Polotsk, somewhere in Russia. There was a thriving Jewish community. There were yeshivas, the study of Torah, Jewish life. You can imagine everything you needed for a kosher, good life. And this man, he made his living there making jewelry, gold, silver. But unfortunately, there was a downturn in the economy and his business failed. And for whatever reason, he was forced to move to Odessa. I don't know how many are familiar with Odessa. Odessa, actually, in more recent years, had a very big and thriving Jewish community. Then it did as well, but it was a very illiterate, it was a very unlearned community. The Jews of Odessa were maybe culturally Jewish. Today, there's, by the way, a vast community in Odessa. There's 2 Jewish universities, I think, in Odessa. Today, it's a very thriving community. I don't know the history, so I might be wrong. But as far as I understood the story, at least this is what the Rebbe Marash said to this man. The man was crushed that he had to, for whatever reasons, move to Odessa. Maybe it was work-wise, and he just felt he's moving to a desert. Even though there was a Jewish community, but he said, there wasn't the right, maybe it wasn't a Hasidic community. There weren't yeshivas for his kids. It wasn't the same environment. He was really downtrodden by it. And the Rebbe Marash looked at him and said, you think that God's sending you there because of your parnasa, your company is sending you there. It's not your company that's sending you to Odessa, he told him. Because God could have kept you in Polotsk where you were living till now and making a decent living. If your company is relocating you, there has to be a different purpose for this. It's a divine reason. And so the Rebbe Marash said to him, you're complaining that there's no yeshiva there for your kids. Why don't you see it as your mission to improve the quality of Jewish education in Odessa? See to it that you could inspire, you could influence, you could educate the people there. So you're not going just for business reasons. You're going for a spiritual reason. I think we all have to realize, wherever we might be in the world, if you are in a particular place, sometimes I think I'm lost, I don't know what I'm doing here. No, there's a reason for it. Let's find a reason. Are you there to uplift someone? Are you there to refine those sparks, making that bracha? And this mission isn't, like you see in the story, it's not just for the entirety, it's not just for the other. Each one of us is given our particular specific mission. Every one of us has our own unique job to do to make this world one which welcomes God. We were reading last week the Maimer, the discourse of the Rebbe that he gave us as an inaugural address, Basi Legani Achosi Kala, describing this world as God's garden. Yes, you could see it as a jungle. There are reasons to see it as a jungle, but God doesn't see it that way. God says, this is my garden, but the garden needs to be tended to. So the next time you're lost or you're stuck at home, remember, you're never stuck. There's a reason God put you there. And you have a mission to uplift, to refine, to gather those sparks. And so if each one of us has our unique, specific, indispensable purpose and journey that we need to achieve and accomplish, so the places we go, the people we speak to, this is God handing us a specialized mission. God saying, I need you to do this for me. You, specifically you. Yeah, don't look at the other person. This is a mission that God gave to you that no one else could achieve. People often ask themselves, how did I end up in this position? With this job, with this, whatever it is. Why is it this guy works, I don't know, in his job, so much easy or whatever it might be? Stop comparing ourselves to others. Of course, we can emulate, we can learn from, but the message that Kabbalah is telling us is that we each have our divine sparks. We each have our mission. And that's what compels our destiny. That's what draws us to where our sparks are lying dormant, perhaps for millennia. And that's why we are where we are. In Tehillim, David HaMelech says, Me Hashem mitzadei gavar kananu, the footsteps of man are directed by God. And I was reading the insight in Hayom Yom that the Rebbe highlights about this. And he says that when you find yourself in whatever place it might be, don't ever think you're lost. Don't ever think it's there for no reason. I'm reminded of a story that once, sometime in the 1960s, I think it was late 60s, it was Yud Shvat. Any of you been following the news, what's going on in New York? They were just plummeted with snow. They got this huge blanket of snowstorm yesterday. My siblings sent me pictures of shoveling out and the kids sledding in it and looking at pictures from long ago in the snow. And this story happens that it was Yud Shvat, which is the inauguration of the anniversary, the Rebbe's inauguration to the leadership of the Yortzeit of the previous Rebbe. So it was always a big day in the Chabad calendar. And there was a group of ladies who traveled for a convention in Michigan. And their flight was canceled because of the snowstorm. They didn't know what to do. So they called 770. They called to send a message to the Rebbe to say, what do we do because we're stuck in the airport? And in the background, they could hear the Rebbe turning to his secretary saying, stuck? You never ever stuck. No one's ever stuck. There's a reason, there's a purpose, whether it's to perform a mitzvah, whether it's between yourself and God, whether it's between yourself and your fellow human being. You are a divine messenger. And wherever a messenger might be, you're representing the power of the one who sent you. So you have a reason for it. A more recent story that happened where there was a group, a family that was traveling. I mean, I heard so many stories like this, and you probably think about them in your own life. But they were traveling, they needed to make a minyan, somebody had to say Kaddish, and they were one short. And they're in the airport and searching for the minyan, and all of a sudden, they meet the security guard who's giving them, looking at them, and they don't know what's going on. And he says that he had a dream last night where his father tells him that I need you for the minyan. I need you to say Kaddish for me. And here this group got stuck in the airport. Were they really stuck or were they sent there? They missed their purpose. They were actually going to a wedding. They missed the wedding. But they made a minyan for this man. And always in life, we have to find those situations. Let me share with you a story that is in development right now. I got an email from a friend of mine, a classmate. In fact, we spent a year together here in 2002, here in South Africa. And Avi writes as follows, that someone from his community mentions to him, his father was in the hospital. His father was a religious Jew in New Jersey. He wound up in the hospital, and his roommate in the hospital was just a grouchy old man. Let's put it that way. This guy was difficult, especially whenever this religious Jew would get religious. So when this man's father would pray, when he would put on his tefillin, this old man would put on his TV on the loudest volume possible. Whenever this man's family would come to visit, this old man in the next room would start talking out loud on his phone and making phone calls and just doing things to annoy his religious Jewish roommate in the hospital. And just saying things that were borderline anti-Semitic, just being very rude and obnoxious. One day, the son says he walked into the room, and this difficult old man says, quiet. The man is praying, you be quiet. The rabbi's praying. They didn't understand. Here he had a complete about face, a complete change in his way. And it's unbelievable what happened. He said earlier that day, or the previous day, a Chabad yeshiva bacher came into the room with his tefillin. We're talking about a 15-year-old boy or something, and asked if he's Jewish. Asked the two men if they want to put on tefillin, want to say a prayer together. This old man gave this kid a mapala. He said, "You don't ask me if I'm Jewish. It's not your business what religion I am. Get out of here. Stop bothering patients in the hospital who are sick and trying to recover." And he shouts at the kid and tells him, "Get out." The kid was frightened and started running. In the meantime, the other man, the religious man, calls him back. "Come back, come back, come back." So the kid comes back. He's so shy, he doesn't know what to do. He doesn't want to bother them. He says, "I haven't had a chance to pray it. In the hospital, didn't have my tefillin." Made up, tells him some stories. He says, "Please, I want to pray with you." So the boy is overjoyed. After experiencing the old man shout at him and chase him away and tell him it's not his business to ask anyone their religious affiliations. So the young boy helps this religious man put on tefillin and pray. And when he was done, the religious man tells him, "Thank you so much for helping me to pray today. Couldn't have done it without you. And please, I think you're doing an amazing job. I'm grateful to you. Please continue. I'm telling you, you don't know how you uplift me as a patient in the hospital when I'm sick. You don't know what good it does. Please continue doing this for all the other patients, any other patients you encounter." And you could see the boy was restored with a little bit of confidence. Just imagine you're that 15-year-old kid. As the boy left, the old man starts shouting at this religious man, "You're a faker. You're a liar. You deceived that kid. I saw you pray this morning. I saw you pray. You just lied to that kid." And he says, "All you religious people, you're fakers, you're liars." So the religious man says to the old man, "You know something? I did this for you because you just scared that kid. That young kid is trying to do good. He's trying to uplift the spirits of people who are stuck in a hospital who aren't well. And just imagine you were that kid. Would you continue doing that after you were just told to stop bothering people and not to ask them their religious identities and all that?" The kid was scared off by you. Why would he want to continue in this? So I figured God will forgive me for praying a second time today, but I wanted to restore the confidence in that young child. And for you, I don't want that you should be in trouble when you get to the heavenly gates. I don't want that you should have a stain, that you deprived so many people of that spiritual upliftment in the hospital because you're in a bad mood. So I decided I'll change it. The old man heard that. He was really taken aback. He said, "You did it for me?" And he really felt, he apologized for his behavior. He said, "I'm also Jewish. And whatever, I don't know what he experienced. He obviously went through some difficulties in life, why he was behaving in this erratic and crazy way." But what I take from the story is we all have stories in our life. The reason I got the story is because the two hospital roommates kept in touch until recently. The old man passed away, but and therefore the roommate was looking for that bacher. He wants to know who is that yeshiva bacher who helped, who brought, who played a role in the story. The point I want to say to each of us is we all have our indispensable mission. We all have a purpose, a reason why we're here. We all have something, a difference we can make. And we have to try our part and realize, why do we live all over the world? We're here to uplift. We're here to refine. We're here to make a difference. We all have a difference we could make. And this is the doctrine that is so powerful. And it's actually from the Talmud. The Talmud tells us a very interesting thing, that 40 days before the formation of an embryo, 40 days before a fetus is even developed, conceived, says the Gemara, Baskol Yoitzes Fameris, a heavenly voice issues forth and declares, Bas Pliny le Pliny, the daughter of so-and-so is destined to marry the son of so-and-so. Base Pliny LaPliny, and this house is destined to connect with that house. And Sada Pliny LaPliny, and this field and business is meant for that person. What does that mean? It's the concept of bashert that many people have a hard time with. If a couple got married and the marriage didn't work out, where's bashert in all this? Maybe this child would never have come into the world if this couple didn't get together. There's a reason, there's a purpose for everything. And even if it's not a child, there's a reason why you two people came. There's no mistake. Everything in this world is divinely orchestrated. And this doesn't contradict the concept of free choice, which we could discuss in another show. But the Talmud is teaching us that even before we're physically created, it's already determined who's going to marry whom, where they're going to live, what work they're going to do. So while who we marry and where we live are actually major forces in shaping our lives, what job, it seems, okay, on the one hand, I can imagine marriage, it's more monumental, it's more of a big job. I mean, you want to earn a living, even a menial job, what difference does it make? Why is the Talmud saying that even your job is predestined? So it seems insignificant, right? And yet the Talmud says it's still a major, major role of our lives in the scheme of things. You think of what it means nowadays. People switch careers sometimes every few days or whatever it might be. But the Talmud is saying it's so integral to our lives that it's one of the three major things that are determined pre-birth. The Talmud says who you're going to marry, what job you're going to have, where you're going to live. Who cares where we work? As long as we have enough money to make ends meet, right? Who cares where I live as long as I have shelter? But the Talmud is telling us where we work is not just simply having a livelihood. It's about a God-given mission. It's about God giving us our unique opportunities, that each one of us is unique, that we each have our own specific mission and purpose on earth to elevate, to refine those precious sparks of divinity. So yes, indeed, where we work is important, not just because you're going to pay your bills. It's important because it determines where a large part of our life's mission is going to be fulfilled. Do you know that 12 years ago, more than 12 years ago, nearly 13 years ago, in 2008, Bachi and I were discussing, it was November 2008, or maybe even earlier. Maybe it was actually a little bit earlier than that, in June 2008, discussing with Rabbi Kievman coming out to South Africa for 6 months to just get involved in Chabad seniors programs. Till this very day, we still haven't moved. Most of our things are still sitting in New York. Every time I go, I bring back a few boxes. We never made a move here because it was temporary. Of course, everything we do is temporary. Who knows what the next thing is going to bring? But we realize that it's all part of our divine mission. So that brings me back to our original question. If we each have our unique mission, if we each have a divine purpose, then why can't Jews live in Egypt? What's wrong with Egypt? But this says the Kabbalah that, you know why Jews can't live there? Because there's nothing left for us to do there. We are willing to go to the ends of the earth to rescue all those far-flung sparks that need our upliftment and refinement. But if we're sure that the place is barren and holds no sparks, move on. And this, says Kabbalah, this is already been done in Egypt. There's no sparks left there. Kabbalah teaches that before leaving Egypt, our ancestors managed to salvage all the divine sparks that flooded into Egypt, and all those that were created for Egypt were all taken care of. By the time our ancestors were emancipated from their slavery, they were liberated from their Egyptian bondage, Talmud says that there was nothing left. They took it all. They refined whatever sparks they were meant to do there. So there's no more spiritual potential in Egypt. We have no business to be there. That's what the Kabbalah says. And that's a fascinating idea that, yes, wherever we go, we have a mission, we have a purpose, there's a reason why we're there. But if we've fulfilled that mission and there's nothing left to do there, move on. You're done. There obviously is a reason why you go to a place. And once you've done your job, you know that your job is done and you could go on from there. And so since they emptied out Egypt, since they finished their job, there was nothing left to do. Let me end with a little story that I recently came across that perhaps can illustrate this point. There was a great rabbi, in fact, he was referred to as the chief rabbi of Australia, lived in Sydney. His name was Rabbi Chaim Gutnick. And does he still live there, maybe? I don't think so, no. Anyways, he worked in his father-in-law's business. And the Jewish community in Adelaide, which is a city with a very small Jewish community, they asked him to come and serve as their rabbi for the high holidays. I believe there's a Chabad in Adelaide today, but back then not, and they needed a rabbi to help them for Yom Tov. So they asked Rabbi Chaim Gutnick to come out there. They had no permanent rabbi of their own. So Rabbi Gutnick, being a good chassid, asked the Rebbe if he should do so. And the Rebbe said to him, while you're in Adelaide, make sure you concern yourself with the needs of the Egyptian Jews living there. Now, what does that mean? So Rabbi Gutnick, he flew out to Adelaide for Yom Tov, and little did he know just how God, as we say, that God directs the footsteps of man. And he tells a story. He says he arrived in Adelaide the day before Rosh Hashanah, and he went to the shul there. And as he was surveying the sanctuary, a woman entered the shul, and she asked him, where is the most sacred part of the shul? What a question. Where's the most sacred part of the shul? So he pointed to the Aron Kodesh, the holy ark that contains the Torah scrolls. This is, before he could even say another word, she rushed out of the shul. And she led this blind teenage girl straight to the Aron Kodesh, and then she left. The girl kissed the curtains of the ark, and she burst into tears. She was there for a couple of minutes, and then the woman came back and escorted this young girl out. So he says he described the entire, this baffling scene to the secretary of the shul who invited him to be the rabbi for Yom Tov. And she said, don't worry about it. She's one of the Egyptians. They don't even get along with our community. Her parents don't even come to the shul on Rosh Hashanah. So she probably decided that she wants to visit before Rosh Hashanah, before Yom Tov. Now, the rabbi hearing this, you can imagine that, what did the Rebbe tell him? Send regards to the Egyptian Jews in the city, right? In Adelaide. That's what the Rebbe in New York is telling Rabbi Gutnick in Australia. He says he wasn't sure what to make of all this. He could just think that the Rebbe says to look after and involve yourself with the Egyptian Jews living in Adelaide. That's what the Rebbe said to him. And here comes an Egyptian Jewish girl crying at the Aron Kodesh. So he decides he has to figure out what's going on here. And he says he rushed out, but this girl was gone already. By the time he spoke with the secretary, by the time he realized what's going on, the girl was gone. He says, though, on Rosh Hashanah, he felt that there was actually this gulf between the local community and the Egyptian Jewish community living in Adelaide, that there was a community of Jews, and they weren't involved with the shul. There was like this apartheid, Jewish apartheid, the separation. And he felt he really needed to do something about this. So he asked around. Good way of finding out is, tell me about that blind girl. And he says that they tried to contact each other, He called her, and she said that her name is Betty. She's blind. But something stopped them. He said when he tried to talk to her on the phone, someone tried to interfere. Something was going on. He doesn't know what. Says he couldn't speak to her. He got hold of her, Betty. She's Egyptian. She's Jewish, living in Adelaide. But that's it. He couldn't speak to her further. He couldn't figure out what's going on. Then he said it was the night before Yom Kippur, and he got her address. He got her phone number. He tries calling her, but as soon as he said that he's Rabbi Gutnick, the line would go dead. She didn't want to speak to him. And he says, you don't despair. He didn't give up. And despite he said it was very late in the day. It was the night before Yom Kippur, late at night. He decided he's going to persevere. And he took a taxi, went to her house. And as he's standing at the door, they don't want to let him in. He says, please, I traveled all this great distance. I came here. I want to speak to you. So they opened the door. And he came inside and slowly was able to develop trust with them. And eventually, he got into conversation with this Betty. And she told him her story. She said her family came to Australia. They came, I guess, from Egypt. Or maybe they're just Egyptian Jews, whatever the case was. And he says they sent her to the only school in the city that was a school for the blind. And it was a Catholic school. Adelaide is not such a large community. I don't even know if here in Joburg we have accommodation for any blind Jewish people. In New York you do have, but they sent her to a Catholic school that accommodates the blind. And she says the people in the school were very, very nice to her. And her parents were pleased that she was being treated well. And obviously there's this gulf in the Jewish community, but here in the Catholic school, she's being looked after. And they were struggling financially, and they gave her a full scholarship. They gave her a bursary. They were looking after her. They were always very nice and concerned. And now they said after 5 months that she's in the school, the priest of the school started to befriend her and was lecturing her about Christianity. And although she's Jewish, so she was ignoring him. But now they started, with the bait and click. We gave you a bursary. You have to convert. And they started applying the pressure that she has to convert. And she says at the same time, her parents got a letter from the school that said that due to lack of space in the school, they're forced to turn away any prospective students of their own faith, Catholic students. So the only way they're going to continue this bursary was if she converts to Christianity, because this is a bursary for Catholic kids, not for Jewish ones. And so what are her parents to do? She says she overheard her agitated parents discussing the issue. And they decided, what could they do? They reconciled. It's the harsh reality, and they have to convert her to Catholicism. And she says, although she doesn't even know that much about Judaism, she just knows that she is Jewish. She knows about our belief in one God, and she hardly knows more. But she knew that this was too much to abandon her own religion. And so she started praying to God. She went to the shul to pray at the Aron Kodesh. She knew that Yom Tov was coming. It was the night before Rosh Hashanah. They don't go to the shul on Rosh Hashanah. But she went to pray at the Aron Kodesh that night. And she says then, I guess, I don't know, maybe she was alone at home, or I don't know what the story was, but she gets a knock on the door. And it was a neighbor, a non-Jewish neighbor, who said, tomorrow's your Jewish, she said to the neighbor, tomorrow's our Jewish New Year. And although my parents don't go to the shul, I want to ask you for a favor. She asked the neighbor to take her to the shul so she could pray for a few minutes. And that was how she wound up in the shul. She says it was Rosh Hashanah night, and they had guests at their Rosh Hashanah table. And they were talking, and they talked about this rabbi who came from Sydney to Adelaide, and he's asking about you. How do you know the rabbi? So this Betty says, I knew this is some kind of God-given sign to me. And on the one hand, I wanted to speak to you. But on the other hand, my mother wouldn't allow it. She was afraid that you're going to convince me not to convert, and then we're not going to have a bursary in the school. And so we're torn apart. And that's when the girl's parents chimed in. They said they really don't know what to do. On the one hand, they don't want her to convert to Catholicism. On the other hand, what choice do they have? They don't have the finances to put her into a school for the blind. And this is when Rabbi Gutnick remembered what the Rebbe said to him. The Rebbe said, look out for the Egyptian Jews of that community. So of course he understood he's there on a mission from the Rebbe. So I don't remember the conclusion, but I do believe that Rabbi Gutnick made a plan, and he made a plan for them, whether they moved to Sydney, whatever it was, but he stopped this conversion to Catholicism, and he certainly made a plan to help this girl that she could get out of that situation. And I think if we reflect on this little story, that wherever we go, there's a purpose, there's a reason. We're there to refine those sparks. People end up in all sorts of random places and situations. Whatever circumstances we find ourselves in, remember, there's a reason for it. Egypt is unique in the fact that it was completely scourged of all its holiness. So that's why we don't go back there. There's no reason. There's no purpose for us there. You want to go there you have to go to Egypt for any other reason. Gesundheit. But there's no reason for a Jew to wind up in Egypt because all of the sparks of Egypt have already been refined. But wherever else you might be, whether in Joburg or Cape Town or Durban or Schlange, Pretoria, you're traveling, remember, there's a spark for you, for each one of us, a unique spark. And each one of us has to tap into it and do our part, refine it, uplift it, and we'll make the difference that we were put into this world. That indispensable difference that each one of us is here for. Any questions, ladies and gentlemen, before we conclude today's share? Anyone on Facebook, WhatsApp, YouTube, Zoom? So it's nice to see everyone here today. Tomorrow morning, join us for Cultivating Character, 10 to 11 a.m. right here in our Chabad Senior Zoom room for less oi and more joy. Zach isn't everyone. Cheers.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Wonderful.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Rabbi.
Rabbi.
Pleasure. Go ahead. I was still on. Yes. Who's that?
I just said thank you, Rabbi. Ben here from Cape Town.
Okay. Oh, you're from Cape Town joining us. That's awesome. How are you doing?
Great, thank you, sir. How are you doing?
Awesome. Great. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, everyone. And as they say in Zulu, sei gesund.
Thank you, Rob, for a great lecture.
Thank you, Rabbi.
That's
Wonderful.
awesome. Thank you, Rabbi.
What a pleasure.
It's good. Yeah. Mm.